Welcome to SEI Asia's podcast on environment and policy in Asia. In this podcast series, we invite experts to discuss the many critical and complex environmental challenges in Asia and how to find solutions through policy and partnerships.
Hello everyone, I am Dayoon Kim, a research associate from SEI Asia. Our episode today is about women environmental human rights defenders and their powerful and inspiring work on the ground that contributes to social and environmental justice. We have two very special guests today, Indira Shreesh from Indigenous Women's Legal Awareness Group in Nepal, and Kakay Tolentino from By Indigenous Women's Network in the Philippines.
I am Advocate Indira Shreesh. I belong to Magar Indigenous community from Nepal. I have one organization, Indigenous Women Legal Awareness Group. Short name is INWOLAG. INWOLAG is working on Indigenous women.
Masampat tabe, abe kitang mapesan. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone. I'm Kakay Tolentino, an Indigenous Dumagat women in Sierra Madre Mountain Range in Central Luzon in the Philippines. I'm also at present the National Coordinator of BAI Indigenous Women's Network, and I'm human rights defender and environmental defender.
Thank you very much. Then let us start with the first question, which is, please tell us what drives you to fight for the environment and human rights.
Thank you for the questioning. When I have to explain my drive to fight for the environmental and human rights, my memories take back to my childhood experience that has had a deep impact on me. I born and grew up in a remote village in Nepal. I remember my childhood and luckily I survived from the flood swept in that day due to heavy rainfall. There was devastating landslide and flood overriding in the village. I still remember most of houses were swept, damaged private and community property, loss of agriculture, land, and domesticated animals. Most of my relatives immigrated in new location and disconnected culture, tradition, values, and more importantly, with their ancestral land. However, there was no any sympathy and empathy because of former government of Nepal and other non-governmental organizations did not support any means. Simultaneously, I have seen and felt several discrimination with people in my country. For example, there is still discrimination on gender-based violence, pro-poor people, and more importantly, the indigenous women who are real victims of climate crisis and government policies. Now I am engaging as a lawyer academically and environmental advocate by profession. With this privilege, I devoted my career to advocate rights of indigenous women against every aspect of discriminations.
Thank you very much for sharing the story. And indeed, as you mentioned, a lot of environmental degradation, climate change impacts, as well as development activities, and make further challenges to defenders and communities. Would you tell us one specific challenge that you and your community and your organization have faced, and what were the strategies that you have used to address this challenge?
Okay, the indigenous peoples, women are main actor of biodiversity conservation. However, government or non-governmental organizations never recognize their role and responsibility towards biodiversity conservation as a right holder. For example, at least 25 indigenous girls raped, and out of them, 6 girls were raped repeatedly during the establishment first national park in the country, called it Chitao National Park. In the name of national park, indigenous peoples abruptly relocated from their ancestral land, and they did not get any meaningful care from the state. Benefit sharing mechanism and development of indigenous people in the biodiversity conservation and climate crisis is rarely seen in action, despite there are written several rights in the papers. Therefore, we are initiating to build capacity development of indigenous people, especially the indigenous women, through education and economic empowerment. In doing so, we are forming indigenous women group as community-based organizations and empower them via several awareness campaigns such as adult literacy classes, environmental conservation campaigns, and right-based approach classes, including alternative income generating activities. We are focusing empowering indigenous women and advocacy to policymakers.
Indeed, as you shared, Indira, many efforts are taking place from INWOLAG and different grassroots organizations. I hope that further awareness of the public on this topic through this podcast episode would help amplifying your voices and demands. Now, moving to Kakay, as you're closely engaged in the ongoing efforts to uphold the rights of indigenous peoples and environment, what are the key lessons that you want to share that fellow defenders can learn from?
So the key lessons I want to share to many people in the world, we must not getting away from our peoples in the ground. We must learn and educate with them. We must live with the people. Our ancestral lands that reflect our daily living, lives, and indigenous practices and knowledge that trains in our heart and mind that this is all matters about indigenous identity, indigenous rights to self-determination. Our indigenous knowledge and practices has a big or crucial role in defending our environment and resources, so as the rights of the indigenous peoples in defending our ancestral land. In our ancestral land, the vast tract of lands, forests, rivers that embodied our natural resources, and that is a big part of the Filipino peoples and building our nation with freedom, sovereignty, and democracy.
Thank you very much, Kakay. Would you explain further on who would be the allies to support the work on the ground, and what resources do you and your community need from these allies and actors?
The number one allies on our struggle are the students, the professionals, the church people who are willing to live with us, to go in our communities, to learn with us, teach with us, and eat with us, sleep with us. So, although in line of the politicians, we treated as this network or how we build rapport with them. We build or form alliances, but this is a temporary because most of the politicians are working with the people only because of their personal interest while in power. As we experience, as of now, that the government, it seems we are not people of the Philippines. They easily red tag, vilify us as terrorists, and in result, they killed, they massacre, they enforce the displacement and dislocation of communities. And our rights was really violated as indigenous peoples. And also, most of all, people of the Philippines. This was happening today. The massive killing and different kinds of human rights violations in the indigenous people's communities because of this imperialist greed to our natural resources that is found in our ancestral land and territory. So if I'm always speaking, the big problem of indigenous people is the imperialist greed who plunder our natural resources, violate our human rights, and nothing was left for us if we will not defend our rank.
Kakay and Indira, would you like to share any further messages to broader audience?
We indigenous peoples always calling and challenge the broad masses to cling our hands to one another in defending our basic human rights. We must united in defending our ancestral land, resources, and territories because this is the last frontier of our natural resources and last frontier of our national patrimony.
The organizing the illiterate and poor indigenous women is thought, though this is the long process to empower them on the issue and getting their rights. So there are needed long-term strategy and practical actions to empower them. It is essential to implement the both approaches in these illiterate and poor societies, that is need-based and right-based approaches. Education and income generating activity is must to organize the people for fight against every aspect of discriminations. Therefore, I believe such activities could be sustainability.
We deeply appreciate you, Indira and Kakay, for participating in our podcast and sharing your experiences and insights. For our listeners, if you want to know more about their work, please visit the social media channels of INWOLAG and by Indigenous Women's Network on their important work on the ground.
Thank you for listening to SEI Asia's podcast on environment and policy in Asia. For more information on these topics, guests, and our work, please visit our website on www.sei.org.